Imagine this. You are in a conversation, surrounded by people discussing trivialities, the latest gossip, some superficial news, a repetitive topic that leads nowhere. You try to join the conversation, seeking to bring a deeper thought, a more interesting analysis. But all you receive are blank stares, quick changes of subject, or worse, that feeling that no one really understood what you meant. And then comes that inevitable conclusion. Maybe it's better if I stay silent. If this sounds familiar, you're not alone. But the problem is not you. The problem is that intelligence does not bring people closer. It separates them. The more you understand the complexity of the world, the harder it becomes to find someone who sees the same as you. And don't be fooled. This intellectual loneliness is not just a result of your perception. Society, subtly, rejects those who think differently. Arthur Schopenhauer, one of the most brutal and honest philosophers in history, believed that extreme intelligence is not a gift, but a curse. A burden that isolates those who see beyond the illusion of everyday life. According to him, the more you perceive the contradictions of the world, the more frustrating it becomes to try to explain them to those who live on the surface. After all, most people do not want the truth. They want comfort. And here is the question. If intelligence leads to isolation, what is the way out? How can you live in a world where it seems that no one thinks like you? If you have ever felt this disconnection, this emptiness that comes from the lack of a true intellectual exchange, then this video is for you. Because perhaps the problem is not your loneliness, but rather what it reveals about the world around you. Is intelligence a gift or a curse? On paper, it seems obvious that being more intelligent should make life easier. You understand things faster, notice patterns that others ignore, avoid mistakes that most people make. But in practice, that same intelligence that should be an advantage turns into an invisible wall that separates you from the rest of the world. Arthur Schopenhauer understood this better than anyone. For him, extreme intelligence condemns a person to loneliness because most people simply do not want to think deeply. Not because they are incapable, but because there is no social advantage in doing so. Why delve into philosophical questions, question dogmas, see the hypocrisy of institutions, if all of this only brings discomfort? For most people, life is simpler when they accept the world as it is, without asking difficult questions. But you can't help it. Your brain is always working, always analyzing, always seeing details that others ignore. You notice when people lie to themselves, when they cling to illusions simply because it is easier than facing reality. You feel the frustration of trying to explain something and realizing that no one is really listening. Not because they disagree with you, but because what you say does not fit into the comfortable narrative they have constructed for themselves. And that is the central point. Society does not value truth. It values conformity. There is an invisible structure that keeps everything functioning, and this structure depends on people believing in certain illusions, that happiness lies in consumption, that success is following a predefined path, that common sense is always right. Those who question these premises become a nuisance, a piece out of place. This explains why, throughout history, great thinkers have been rejected before being recognized. Socrates was sentenced to death for corrupting the youth, simply because he asked questions that exposed the ignorance of the powerful. Galileo was persecuted for stating something as obvious as the fact that the earth revolves around the sun. Nietzsche was ridiculed and considered mad for challenging the foundations of Christian morality. Nikola Tesla died forgotten while others profited from his inventions. Do you think it would be different today? Technology has evolved, But human nature remains the same. We still live in a society that punishes those who think differently. Rejection may not be as explicit as in the time of the Inquisition, but it still happens. Today, it is social isolation, the feeling of being hard to understand, the difficulty in finding people who truly share your worldview. And this leads us to the central question: is the problem in intelligence or in the world around? Perhaps the true reason for the isolation of the most intelligent is not a lack of social skills, but the fact that, for most people, truth is something uncomfortable. What you see clearly, others prefer not to see. And this voluntary blindness, this refusal to look beyond the superficial, is what creates the barrier between you and the rest of the world. If there is one thing that society fears more than anything else, it is someone who thinks independently. Most people follow an invisible script, repeating prefabricated ideas without ever questioning them. And that is the real reason why intelligence does not bring people closer. It drives them away. Think about it. When you encounter someone physically stronger than you, you might feel admiration. When you see someone wealthier, you may feel envy, but rarely hostility. But when you demonstrate superior intellect, the reaction is not one of admiration or envy. It is one of resistance. Because while strength or wealth are external advantages, intelligence exposes something much more sensitive: the limitations of others. The mere presence of a deep thinker forces people to confront their own cognitive flaws. And no one likes that. Intelligence acts like a mirror, reflecting what others do not want to see, how limited their beliefs can be, how superficial their conversations have become, how much they live in a cycle of distraction and conformity. And what does a human being do when they feel uncomfortable? They attack or ignore. This explains why the thinker has always been treated as a threat. Schopenhauer understood that society not only rejects those who question its structures, it punishes them. He said that the further someone distances themselves from mediocrity, the more solitary they become, because most people simply do not want to face reality. In a world that values convenience, the truth is too heavy a burden to bear. And this rejection does not happen only on an intellectual level. It occurs in everyday life, in small details. You make an interesting observation, and people look away. You bring a new point of view, and someone changes the subject. You notice patterns that no one wants to acknowledge and are labeled as negative or complicated. It is a subtle but constant process, a gradual distancing that pushes you to the margins, simply because you see what others strive to ignore. But this rejection does not mean you are wrong. On the contrary, it means you are seeing beyond the smoke screen that keeps most people trapped in their illusions. And that is why intelligence leads to isolation. Not because the intelligent choose to be alone, but because the world prefers to push them away. If you have ever felt isolated because of your way of thinking, you may have realized that this loneliness is not always imposed by others. Often, you choose it yourself. At first, there is a genuine effort to connect, to share your ideas, to find someone who sees the world in the same way. But over time, as interactions become frustrating, empty, or simply exhausting, an inevitable conclusion arises. Maybe it's better to be alone. Schopenhauer believed that highly intelligent people often prefer solitude, not out of disdain for society, but out of necessity. He said that for those who think deeply, the world often seems like a superficial spectacle, a theater where most pretend to understand things they have never stopped to question. Trying to participate in this theater requires an absurd mental effort, and in the end, the reward is minimal. The price of socialization is often the frustration of conversations without substance, of interactions where one has to lower themselves intellectually just to be understood. And then the distancing happens. First, you start to avoid certain social circles because you feel that your ideas are not welcome. Then, you begin to better select your interactions, seeking conversations that have some meaning. And finally, you realize that the best company is often your own mind. Not because you disdain others, but because they seem to have nothing to offer beyond fleeting distractions. But here lies the trap. This isolation, which at first seems like a refuge, can quickly become a prison. The mind of a thinker never stops. It is always spinning, analyzing, questioning. And without someone to exchange ideas with, without intellectual challenges, thought can become a closed cycle where everything makes sense only within your own perspective. Intelligence can distance you from ignorance, but it can also trap you in your own bubble of understanding. And that is where loneliness transforms into something deeper. A kind of psychological exile where, even when surrounded by people, you do not feel part of anything. You may even interact, laugh, talk about trivialities, but deep down, you know something is missing. A true dialogue, a genuine exchange of ideas. The great tragedy of self-imposed isolation is that it is not a choice, in the traditional sense. No one wants to be completely alone. But when the world offers only superficiality, when connections become a burden instead of a pleasure, loneliness seems the only logical path. And that is the great irony. The more you understand the world, the less place there seems to be for you in it. If intelligence is something so valuable, why does society constantly reject it? Why are those who see beyond ridiculed, ignored, or even attacked? The answer is simple. The world is not built for thinkers. It is built for conformists. Society, since its beginnings, has always favored those who follow the rules, not those who question them. From school, we are trained to obey, not to think. We learn to memorize information without questioning it, to accept ready-made truths without investigating them. The student who asks too many questions is bothersome. The employee who suggests changes threatens the stability of the company. The citizen who challenges the dominant narrative is treated as a problem. Schopenhauer saw this clearly. He believed that the world was dominated by a system of collective mediocrity, where independent thought was seen as a danger. He said that most people do not want the truth. They want comfort. And the truth is rarely comfortable. This explains why the great thinkers in history were rejected before being recognized. Socrates was sentenced to death for challenging the values of Athens. Galileo was persecuted for suggesting that the earth was not the center of the universe. Nietzsche was called mad for exposing the contradictions of Christian morality. And even in modern times, revolutionary thinkers are often discredited before being accepted. But this resistance to intelligence is not limited to great names in philosophy and science. It happens every day, in small details. It occurs when you try to have a deep conversation and people look away, impatient. When you suggest a different point of view and are immediately rejected. When you notice patterns that others ignore and, instead of curiosity, receive indifference. The truth is that society not only fails to value critical thinking, it actively discourages it. Because people who think too much are not easy to control. They do not accept any narrative. They are not satisfied with simple answers. And this threatens a system that relies on conformity to function. And here lies the greatest paradox. Society needs thinkers to evolve, but at the same time rejects them. It wants the benefits of intelligence, technology, scientific advancements, philosophical innovations, but does not want to deal with the discomfort that deep thinking brings. That is why Those who see beyond others have always been and will always be a minority, a lonely minority, but an essential minority. Extreme intelligence not only isolates, it can be a heavy burden to bear. It is not just society's rejection that hurts, but the very effect of deep understanding on the mind. Schopenhauer saw this brutally. The more one understands reality, the harder it becomes to find pleasure in it. Most people live in illusions. They believe there is an intrinsic meaning to life, that there is justice in the world, that effort will always be rewarded. They believe in concepts like destiny, luck, and merit. These ideas keep people motivated, give purpose, and make them continue moving forward even in the face of difficulties. But a deep thinker, someone who truly questions these premises, sooner or later arrives at an uncomfortable conclusion. None of this is guaranteed. And this is the fundamental difference between the ordinary man and the thinker. The ordinary man can deceive himself, and this illusion keeps him happy. The thinker, on the other hand, sees the world as it really is, chaotic, indifferent, full of contradictions. He realizes that morality is not absolute, but a social construct, that the pursuit of happiness is often just a meaningless race after desires programmed by culture. That most people do not seek the truth, only validation for their pre-existing beliefs. And this is where intelligence becomes a weight. Because once you see, you can no longer unsee. You cannot simply turn off your mind and pretend that everything makes sense. You cannot return to comfortable ignorance. As Nietzsche wrote, "When you look long into the abyss looks back at you." This is the price of understanding, a growing disconnection from the world around. While others celebrate small victories, a new car, a promotion at work, a fleeting romance, the thinker wonders, does this really matter? What seems satisfying to most appears superficial to him. And this feeling of displacement grows, little by little, until he feels like a stranger in his own time. It is no wonder that many of the greatest thinkers in history experience melancholy and even depression. Pascal described the infinite silence of the universe as something terrifying. Kierkegaard spoke of the anguish of being an isolated individual. Kafka transformed the feeling of alienation into literature. Schopenhauer, perhaps the most pessimistic of all, saw life as an endless cycle of desires and frustrations, where the only escape was total renunciation. But here lies the big question. If intelligence condemns us to see the truth without illusions, how can we live without being consumed by it? Is there a path between comfortable ignorance and absolute despair? This is the question that separates those who merely suffer from their intelligence from those who learn to use it. And the answer may lie precisely in the acceptance of one's own solitude. If intelligence leads to isolation and a deep understanding of the world can become a burden, what remains? What can someone who sees beyond the surface do to avoid being consumed by their own mind? Schopenhauer believed that the only way for a thinker to find any kind of peace was to accept their solitude and redirect their energy towards something productive. He argued that intelligent people should not waste time trying to fit into a society that would never fully understand them. Instead, they should embrace solitude as a privilege, not as a punishment. But this is not an easy answer, because deep down, every human being desires connection. Even the most intellectually independent want to be understood, want to find someone who shares their worldview, who can offer a true dialogue. The problem is that these encounters are rare, and expecting society as a whole to value the depth of thought is a mistake. So, what to do? The first thing is to understand that intellectual solitude does not mean total isolation. There are ways to find like-minded minds, whether through books, philosophy, intellectual communities, or even in art. Many of the greatest thinkers in history lived isolated lives. But their ideas transcended their time because they were recorded, discussed, and eventually recognized. The second thing is to direct your intelligence towards something meaningful. A mind that does not find challenges and purpose quickly becomes a trap for itself. Creating, exploring, constantly learning, all of this can transform the weight of intelligence into a powerful tool. And lastly, accept that the world will always resist those who think differently. Society never embraced its great thinkers while they were alive. Only later, when their ideas were no longer seen as dangerous, did they become admired. This means that if you feel like you don't fit in, you might be exactly where you should be. But now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt that your way of thinking isolates you? That the people around you simply cannot keep up with your worldview? Leave your comment below and share your experience. And don't stop here. If this video made sense to you, then the next one is essential. Click and keep watching, because this conversation is not over yet.